Wow, my hair is like obscenely curly today. Well, today we're going to be talking about the 2008 film The Incredible Hulk. This movie is technically the second MCU film. We'll get into that later as to why it's technically. It was directed by Louis Leterrier, but if it's French, it might be Louis Leterrier. I don't know. It was written by Zach Penn, and I'm excited to talk about this film particularly because I think that it was a really good idea to introduce him into the MCU. I just don't think it was the correct way to do it. So I think before I talk about the acting, I usually go for the acting first. I'm going to talk about the general idea and the plot. The basic plot is Bruce Banner, who was exposed to gamma radiation through his job as like a scientist. He turns big and green when he's angry, which, he's a classic comic book character. Everyone loves him. Everyone knows who the Hulk is. He's used in general basic pop culture now, like, oh, you're hulking out right now? It means, are you angry? And I think I've always liked the Hulk as an intriguing character just because I think that the idea that he's a doctor and he's super smart, but he can't figure out how to solve his own problem, which is getting angry and turning into this big, green, scary thing. Which is totally fine. It's a good plot. It's a good idea. I just don't think that maybe this storyline was good for the film. I think that, we never really gotten an origin story for the Hulk. Every time there's a Spider-Man film, we get an origin story almost every time, with the exception of the newest Spider-Man, where you kind of get a little bit of backstory during Captain America Civil War. But with the Hulk, you're just kind of supposed to assume, okay, he got it during his line of work. We never really understand fully what happened. I think it's a really cool idea we could delve into. But my biggest issue with this film was that it was funny, which Marvel movies are funny. They're supposed to be funny. I mean, you laughed at Endgame. You laughed at Infinity War. There were just funny moments in every film that you really get to enjoy and cherish as a fan. But I think that with the Hulk, what they could have done is more of a serious film. Like, there are some instances where the comedy shines out that I think was okay, but maybe it could have been dialed back a little bit. Like the fact that Bruce Banner doesn't understand, I think it's Portuguese that he says, that he speaks in the beginning of the film, and he never understands it, and he can never, speak it correctly, and he messes it up a ton of times, which becomes predictable and generally just not funny. I sat there and I was like, okay, we get it, he can't speak Portuguese, but if he wanted to communicate something, he could. Like, there's a way he could say, you're not going to like me when I'm angry, without saying, you're not going to like me when I'm angry. Which I get leads to plot, but whatever. Regardless, I think the Hulk would be a really interesting, like, drama movie. Like King Kong, where you have, this giant ape who obviously loves this human girl. But in this film, my biggest issue with, like, the love interest, where we see Bruce fall in love with Betty or whatever, my biggest issue is that we see the Hulk liking Betty more than we see Bruce liking Betty. I found that I enjoyed the film a lot more when the Hulk was on screen, which is fine. I think you're supposed to. It's about the Hulk. It's not the Incredible Bruce Banner, which is fine. I get that, but I don't like sitting in a seat waiting to see action. I prefer to like the characters, like in Iron Man, for instance. When I watched Iron Man, I liked Iron Man. I think Iron Man was a great superhero. However, I also really enjoyed it when it was just Tony Stark. He was an intriguing character. I didn't give a damn about Bruce Banner as a whole. I could have done without the whole Bruce Banner thing. If it was just about the Hulk, great. But Bruce Banner is such a boring character, right? Like, you need to find some way to make him interesting and fun, which they did in the MCU, I believe, especially towards, like, Thor Ragnarok, when you kind of see the Hulk starts to have his own thoughts and feelings, And then, you'd see Bruce Banner. Bruce Banner's like, I don't even remember what happened. And it's a battle between two opposing people that are the same people, essentially. But they didn't really do that a lot with this film. I feel like it was really, really heavily Hulk focused with almost no Bruce Banner, which is fine, but it's not what I personally wanted to see. Now let's get into the directing and the acting. The directing was actually really good. I really enjoyed how they did it, with some few minor exceptions. I loved the field scene where he's like fighting the helicopters and like, arr, arr, arr. That was a cool, really cool fight action scene. I love the scene in the cave where you see the Hulk, get angry and throws rocks because, he hits his head and he thinks it's like some primal force. But it was just his own fault. And, that's fine. I really enjoyed all those scenes. But one scene in particular really I didn't like was in the very beginning when he gets mad at the factory. Way too dark. There should have been light in that factory because then we could see the Hulk better. I get it was like this big reveal, but I think it was like 3 minutes of like just random sounds and like some flashes of green. Like it wasn't. I think it was supposed to be suspenseful, and we were supposed to be like, "Ooh, I can't wait to see the Hulk." But really, I just found myself being like, "Okay, what does he look like?" Like, I just want to know what it is so I can move forward from there. It was kind of pointless, and it didn't drum up that much anticipation, I think, for me. Definitely, for me, but not necessarily for anybody else. Which is fine. I get it. But it's not really what you want to see. As for acting, we have Edward Norton as Bruce Banner, which I think was fine. I think that... Mark Ruffalo is better. Mark Ruffalo is Mark Ruffalo. But I like Edward Norton as an actor in general. I've always liked what he's done. Except for this film. I don't think he was right for the Hulk. I don't think he was right for Bruce Banner. I wouldn't have been upset to see him come back for the MCU, because I think he is good, and I think he could work with it. But maybe it was just he wasn't given very much, but he wasn't... He was a good Hulk, but not a good Bruce Banner, which is interesting, because the Hulk was like almost entirely CG. So, how are we supposed to determine if that's really acting at that point? But I think what could have done better as an acting point of view was find something that he could make as an issue with himself, because we don't really see him have too many issues with the main villain until the third act. Before then, it's just about him falling in love with Betty, which is fine. It's a love story. It's very similar to like King Kong, which is fine. I get it. I'm okay with the King Kong film. But we have to understand that Bruce Banner is in love with Betty, not the Hulk. And I think that the most dramatic and most tense moments were when the Hulk was there and talking to Betty, which they lose that entirely in the MCU at first. The first time we see him in the Avengers, he's like, he can't control himself, which is fine, I get it. But we can't jump from what we see here into there. It's just not going to work. And I think this would be a good time to discuss why it's not in the MCU, technically. So it was owned by, I believe, Universal Pictures. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, and I'm pretty sure it was Universal Pictures. And what they did there was the MCU made Iron Man 2 after they made Iron Man 1, and was like, oh, we're just going to adopt that movie as part of the MCU. They basically like, it's canon, we're just going to change some things, which is fine, I get it. They can't make a Hulk solo film without the rights, but there's only a matter of time before they buy it anyway. And I hope that they do fix these issues and they make Bruce Banner more of an interesting character in his own solo film, which may or may not happen in the future. Probably not, but it'd be great if it did. Which they already started to do in Thor Ragnarok. I really liked the Hulk in Thor Ragnarok. That's where it really started to be like, oh, the Hulk and Bruce Banner are the same character. Because before, they were just two entirely different characters. And it was really cool to see him progress through Endgame, and I'll get there. That's down the road. We're going to talk about Liv Tyler, who played Betty Ross, and I think she did a great job. You can really tell that she loved Bruce. And it was really fun to watch her play that character, who was just so sweet and sentimental, but also like in a way where she's kind of sketchy, where you don't really know what she's thinking by just looking at her. Like when you're looking at Edward Norton, you're like, okay, he's mad, he's angry, he's happy, he's sad, he's depressed. Whereas her, she's like always she's got this like almost like a poker face, which is good in my opinion because at that point it doesn't matter what she's thinking, it matters more about what she's doing, and she does a lot to help Bruce, and it shows that she loves him. And we don't hear anything about Betty Ross in the MCU ever, which is interesting because I feel like they probably would have been fine. They probably could have gotten together, but rights. Tim Roth played the soldier guy, who is the main villain. Essentially, what happens to him is the government gives him some of the gamma ray stuff to see if they can make him a strong super soldier without having to, make him the full Hulk. And it works at first because they give it to him in low dosages, and he's super strong. Then he goes to this crazy accident, and then he has to get the rest of the gamma radiation in order to be back to full again. And then he turns into the Abomination, who I think is a really cool, big boss. The issue with the main villain in this film is that you don't see him until like the last 10 minutes of the film, which is fine. I don't mind it that much because we were already focused on the general, and he was technically the bad guy at first. But I feel like if we're going to see Tim Roth's Abomination, I don't really care much about his backstory. And we got too much backstory, which is probably the first time I've ever said that in my life. Because we see him as a super soldier before he becomes the Abomination. And I just don't understand how all of a sudden the Hulk knows what's good and bad, and the Abomination knows what's good and bad, and they can decide that they have to fight each other. When they spend the whole film showing that the Hulk is his own separate person. I think it was a little hard to follow, which is fine. I mean, it's a Marvel movie. You kind of, take things with a grain of salt, and you understand, okay, well, this is going to happen because it's going to happen, which is fine. But I think the star of this movie would be William Hurt as the General, and I think that he did a really good job. I would love to see more of him in MCU films. He is really, really good. He's a really strong character, and I think that it was really good to see him against the Hulk because he's such a strong character that you're like, oh, he could actually do some stuff to the Hulk. And of course, he's, related to Liv, and that's a whole other dynamic of the drama there, which is really good. I think it should be a really good drama film. I just don't think it should have been as funny. And I think they could have focused a lot more on Bruce himself, more so than the Hulk. Anyway, you've probably heard enough of me talking to understand what I'm going to rate this. I'm going to rate this film as a C. I think it could have been a lot better, and I think it will get a lot better, particularly through the MCU. He becomes his own character, and it really works very well. But this film in particular, I don't think was a very good starter film for who the Hulk is. Regardless, if you haven't seen it yet, this is the next movie you should watch in your MCU marathon. It is the second film in the MCU. I'm going to go through every film and every show, every season of every show. So if you want to subscribe, and you can get these as I put them out, and I will be putting them out once a day, hopefully, is my plan. And they're going to be everything from Steve Carell films to Marvel films and anything you put in the comments below. So if there's anything you want me to review, put it in the comments. I'll make sure to review it. Make sure to subscribe and like the video. And tune in on Friday nights on the Monsters and Munchkins channel to watch me play D&D with some friends. I hope to see you there.